In this video, we are going to analyze every Hurricane from the 2024 season and predict whether or not they'll be retired. Standards for retirement have gone up in recent years, and that'll be reflected in this video. It was a lot easier for a name to be retired, especially for the U.S. pre-2024, pre-2019, and that's a lot harder. We'll also be looking at other countries that are affected, though, because sometimes a storm may not be requested to retire by the U.S., but by other countries. Hurricane Alberto, Tropical Storm Alberto, though, almost no shot. At $265 million in damage and only 5 fatalities, I really don't think the long-term impact of it. Beryl is interesting. $8.32 billion in damage and 73 deaths. Now, the damage toll in Texas alone stands at $6 billion. The problem is, though, is that retirement standards have gone up. As an example, we'll look up Hurricane Sally from the 2020 season, $7.3 billion in damage, and it was not retired. Neither was storms like Isaias, which caused $5 billion in damage and 17 fatalities, or Zeta, which caused $4.4 billion in damage and 9 fatalities. Granted, Beryl did cause over 40 deaths in Texas, so that makes it a little more of a case. 48 in the U.S. as a whole. So, there's a slight discrepancy there. And $7.2 billion in the U.S. The question is, though, is that going to be enough for them to request retirement? And if it's not, what other countries could? St. Vincent and the Grenadines is a possible one with 8 deaths and $300 million in damage. That could request retirement. I don't really see any of the countries in here that would be particularly likely to request retirement, so I don't know. I think ultimately the U.S. will request retirement, though, not just because there's a lot of damage in the U.S., but also because of the high amount of fatalities and heavy amount of impact, in the United States. And, someone's really bad in Texas too, but also caused damage, up the entire East Coast. So, I think Beryl will be retired. And if I had to estimate Beryl's odds, if I had to estimate the odds of Beryl being retired, I'd probably put them at like 90% chance of being retired. Tropical Storm Chris had 6 fatalities and $51.3 million in damage. I get it was in Mexico, but still, almost no shot. I mean, if Grace wasn't retired, which caused more damage and fatalities, I don't really see how a weak tropical storm could really be retired under these circumstances. Hurricane Debbie's interesting. $4.5 billion in damage and 18 fatalities. Now, the U.S. damage was not strong enough for it to get retired. The question is, though, is the Canadian damage big enough to get it retired? Because it caused heavy damage in Quebec. It caused, damage in Ontario as well. They estimated it to cause $2 billion in damage in the costliest tropical cyclone in Canadian history. Remember, Canada was a big reason why Hurricane Fiona got retired. Granted, Fiona caused more damage in the Caribbean, but Canada was also, a huge reason as to why it got retired, and now it was surpassed. Not to mention that there was heavy damage in upstate New York. I don't think it was enough for it to be retired due to that. But again, Canada, we have to remember how perspective is different, and it being the costliest weather event in Quebec history and the costliest tropical cyclone in Canada gives it a heavy case to be retired. Again, I don't think that $2.5 billion in the U.S. is going to really cause it to be retired, and there wasn't that much damage in the Caribbean. I think it comes down to Canada, and I think that we will see them try to get the name retired. Trying to look at the fatalities in the country of Canada, and there was only one death, although I'm not sure if if 17 people actually die in the U.S., which I still don't think would lead to retirement, by the way. Um, but I do think that Canada has about a 65% chance of requesting retirement for the storm, so I'd estimate the chance of retirement at that. Ernesto, $520 million in damage and 3 deaths. I mean, it could be a little interesting with Ernesto, given some of the damage that it caused, but I don't really see any devastating damage, across any particular country in there, so I doubt Ernesto's retired. Francine didn't cause any deaths, and $1.3 billion just isn't enough to cause a retirement. Gordon was a complete fish storm, so that's out. Helene, I mean, you see the stats, $78.7 billion in damage at least, and 219 fatalities. I would be shocked if Helene is not retired. And then the odds are pretty much at 100%. Cook, $110 million in damage and 1 fatality, and it was in Europe. And usually Europe is, I can't really remember a primarily European affected storm of retirement. It was really known as a European windstorm. Highly doubtful. Milton caused $34.3 billion in damage, but I'd be worried about the 35 fatalities, of which 3 were in Mexico, 32 were in Florida. Mexico's not requesting retirement. The damage was pretty devastating in Florida. The question is, though, is it going to be enough for a retirement, with the fatality count being, relatively low considering what the damage total was? I think it is. I'm putting the odds at 95%, however, because there are some reasons as to why they might not retire Milton. Again, mainly due to its not super high fatality count. Tropical Storm Nadine, $1.5 million damage and 13 deaths, but again, it was in impoverished areas in Central America and southern Mexico, so I doubt it. Oscar's interesting at 8 deaths and $50 million now, but I still doubt it given the areas it affected. Rafael caused 8 deaths and $1.35 billion in damage. This is interesting. Rafael is interesting because it did cause $1.08 billion in damage in Cuba, and led to significant blackouts in Cuba, but there were no fatalities in Cuba, though it did lead to some pretty severe blackouts. But again, are they going to retire a storm that barely caused any fatalities? 5 deaths in Panama with $110 million in damage. So that could be another candidate for it to be retired. But it doesn't look like the damage in Panama was really historic by many stretches. And it was mostly caused by a tropical wave, not even by the tropical cyclone itself. The United States did see some effects from Rafael with significant flooding in Georgia and South Carolina, but not any significant damage reported. So it is, so I doubt it. I put the odds at probably like 30% that Rafael is retired. Tropical Storm Sarah caused 12 deaths and $139 million in damage. Given that the areas affected, though, I would really doubt Sarah is retired. So I predict Beryl, Helene, and Milton are strong candidates to be retired. Debbie is likely to be retired, but I wouldn't say it's guaranteed. Rafael, I doubt it, but you can't count it out, so I expect 3 to 5 storms to be retired. This is a bit of a bold prediction, though. 2023 did not see a single storm have their name retired for the first time since 2014. Granted, no storm was really a strong candidate. Idalia came the closest at 12 deaths and $3.6 billion in damage, but you have to realize there are several factors working against Idalia, such as rip currents leading to a death in Delaware and 3 deaths in New Jersey. So 4 people died due to rip currents. It affected a very localized area from Florida into South Carolina and didn't really cause any damage in the Caribbean. I mean, it is the 6th costliest non-retired hurricane, but again, only sixth. Um, and just again, one death was a week after the tropical cyclone had already passed. The the impacts of this storm were relatively routine for a U.S. storm, unfortunately, because of how much the infrastructure has been built up. And again, that was the only reasonable chance of a retirement. Tropical storm Ophelia might have cost $450 million on the East Coast, but it caused no deaths, and the impacts were relatively tame. Many of these storms, the damage totals are a joke. Lee, you could have made a case for Lee to be retired based on the damage caused in Maine and Canada, but below $100 million overall and not a super amount of fatalities, which again, led to struggles with a lot of storms not being retired. There was just not really any candidates to be retired. Idalia probably came the closest. Idalia probably came the closest. 2022, we saw Fiona and Ian get retired. And again, looking at the stats, Fiona caused over $3 billion damage to land. And a lot of it was in the Caribbean and their Hurricane Ian caused 161 deaths and $113 billion damage. So that obviously is a huge case for retirement. Again, there weren't really any storms that had reasonable candidates for retirement, except for one. Because Nicole caused 11 deaths, but all indirect, $1 billion in damage. You're not really going to see a storm like that get retired, and I wasn't taking it too seriously to be retired. Julia, I was actually low-key surprised that it wasn't retired, based on the 89 deaths and $406 million in damage, but it sort of makes sense. The 54 deaths in Venezuela were incorrect, and we've seen hurricanes cause hundreds of deaths in Venezuela and still not get retired. So it's possible that maybe Venezuela just can't submit requests. I don't know. The heaviest damage was in Nicaragua, where only 5 died. There were 14 deaths in Guatemala and 10 in El Salvador. Unfortunately, those numbers are pretty routine given the impoverished conditions that you kind of dealt with over there. And again, the impoverished conditions means that maybe they submitted requests to be retired, but it might not have been accepted based on a lack of infrastructure. And again, the storm was eerily similar to Tropical Storm Brett, 213 fatalities, and was not retired, mainly again due to a low damage total. So again, eerily similar to 93 Brett, and not retired. No other storm really had that much of a chance. I guess Nicole, you could have argued a case, but I still doubt it. And no other storm really stood a chance. 2021, we saw only one storm get retired, Ida. And obviously, $75 billion in damage and 112 deaths is certainly a huge case. Again, there was some that I thought stood a chance. Hurricane Grace was an interesting one with $513 million damage and 16 deaths. And again, it wasn't retired, even though that's a lot considering the areas that it struck, especially in Mexico. But again, that's why I doubt a lot of storms get retired when you have storms like Grace not getting retired for what they've done in the Caribbean and Mexico. Fred, I don't think 7 deaths and $1.3 billion is going to cut it, and I knew that. Elsa, I think the death toll was only at 4, and then a ship sunk confirming 9 more deaths, and again, $1.23 billion in damage just isn't going to cut it for a U.S.-based storm. If I remember correctly, there were 9 passengers that were missing, and they couldn't find them dead for a bit. And Claudette, 14 deaths in the U.S. and $375 million in damage, but we know how that's not going to cut it at this point, and no other storm really had, that much of a chance to warrant a retirement. I think 2020 is really where this case gets proven the most as to how careful you have to be, because, again, they retire Laura, Ada, and Iota, and given the stats, Laura, $23.3 billion in damage and over 80 deaths. Ada Ada $7.24 billion in damage, 189 deaths. IOTA, $1.4 billion in damage and 84 deaths. All want retirement, but like Zeta, 9 deaths, $4.4 billion in damage, not retired. Delta, $3.09 billion in damage and 6 deaths, not retired. Sally, $7.3 billion in damage and 9 deaths, not retired. Isaias, $5.03 billion in damage and 17 deaths, not retired. And even Hannah had a bit of a case at $1.2 billion in damage and 9 deaths and wasn't retired. Again, they really just did not retire a lot of storms they absolutely could have. And that's where, skepticism comes. In 2019, they had to retire their names from 2019 there too. Dorian earned a retirement for causing $5.07 billion in damage and 84 deaths, especially in the Bahamas. Really devastating. But like Imelda hits Texas and causes $5 billion in damage and 7 deaths. They don't retire, right? Lorenzo, 20 deaths and $362 million in damage. Granted, they get most of it on ships, but Joaquin was retired for that. Lorenzo wasn't. So that is again where I'm getting a lot of doubts and skepticism from all of this. It's like storms like that don't get retired that make me skeptical. So, again, we have plenty of devastating storms that are worthy of getting retirement. The question is, are they going to, retire some of these storms that deserve to get retired, but are they going to do that with the standards, seemingly since 2019, having gone up significantly? And I don't think so. Again, I think Hilton is a no-doubter. Helene is a no-doubter. Milton is highly likely based on the damage, but fatalities are a bit on the low end for me to say it's confident. And Bell is sort of on a bit of the opposite end with that. And then storms such as Raphael and Debbie are possible candidates, but you shouldn't bet too strongly either way.